Hi, my name is Robert. I'm the author of the Reasonable Answers website. And today I'd like to give you a couple of reasons why I believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I think it's a good question. People should be able to ask questions like, why do you believe this is true? And of course, there's some people that say, well, what difference does it make anyway? Well, it's one thing that separates Jesus from all other religious leaders in history. No other religious leader in history has ever predicted their own death and resurrection and then left numerous eyewitnesses to testify to this fact. Jesus was also told about before he was even born, which can be confirmed in the Old Testament with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Paul even said in 1 Corinthians 15 that if Jesus did not rise from the dead, then you're still in your sins and your Christian faith is worthless. So it's extremely important. Without it, there is no Christianity. It doesn't make any sense. So how do we know this is true? Do we have to just take the Bible's word for it? No, we don't. In fact, we can just quote people from the first century and verify most of the details that are in the Gospels. Just quoting a couple of first century historians, Josephus and Tacitus, both these people lived in the first century. They're both historians, and neither one of them were Christians. Just quoting from these people, we can show that Jesus was indeed a person in history that lived around 30 AD. He was crucified at the hands of Pontius Pilate, and this put an end to the followers of Jesus for a short time. And then Christianity arose and grew in the very place where he was crucified. And because people claim that Jesus actually rose from the dead. We can prove this without even using the Bible, just quoting people from the first century. So who are these people that claim to be eyewitnesses, and is their testimony reliable? Well, it's interesting that not all of these people were believers before the resurrection. In fact, James and Paul were both unbelievers before the resurrection. Paul was even out persecuting the church. He hated Christians with a passion. He was going out and having them arrested and put into jail. He was casting his vote to have them put to death. And then all of a sudden this man makes an about face and becomes a strong advocate for Christianity. Why? What caused this man to change? Well, according to him, it's because he met the risen Lord. Paul also said in 1 Corinthians 15 that there was 500 eyewitnesses to the resurrection. He said most of these people were still alive at the time. Now, this would be a very foolish statement for Paul to make if it wasn't true. I mean, if you think about it, he's saying there's 500 eyewitnesses, and he's telling these people that are there at the time, there's 500 eyewitnesses that are around right now. If they weren't really real, all they'd have to say, well, who are they? What are you talking about? He would have been discredited immediately. But it doesn't show up in history of anything like that. We have the same thing in Acts chapter 2. Peter's talking to a large group of people, and he says, you yourselves know the miracles that Jesus performed. So he's saying, you guys seen it. You know what I'm talking about. And then he recounts the story of the crucifixion, which they would also know about. And he says that him and others were eyewitnesses that Jesus actually rose from the dead. We're told that 3,000 people believed what Peter said and were baptized. What's remarkable about this is that they would have been within walking distance of the tomb at the time. If that tomb wasn't empty and there wasn't a bunch of eyewitnesses around, why would 3,000 people believe Peter? It doesn't make any sense. Now, I don't know the names of all 500 of these eyewitnesses, but the Bible does give me the names for 20 of them. I mean, so even if you just took the names of 20 people and you put them into a courtroom, that's a lot of eyewitnesses. Now, these people didn't just claim to get a glimpse of some spirit form of Jesus or anything like that. No. These people claim that they seen him, they touched him, they talked with him, and they ate with him. They seen where the nails went through his hands, where he was hung up on the cross, where he was pierced through the side with a spear, and blood and water came out. And blood and water is evidence that he's actually dead too. But they claim that all these things happened for not just one occasion, but several occasions for a period of 40 days. It's like, well, wait a minute. Well, should we believe them? What if they were all lying? Well, one man that I think would be authority on judging this would be Simon Greenleaf. Simon Greenleaf was a professor of law at Harvard University from 1833 to 1848. He wrote a 3-volume treatise on how to produce evidence into the federal courts, which is still considered a classic in the area of law and evidence today. Simon Greenleaf took the Gospel's testimonies and applied his knowledge of courtroom evidence to it to see whether they were reliable or not. He ended up making this statement. This what I'm looking at is a book by Simon Greenleaf. It's called The Testimony of the Evangelist. Anyway, Simon Greenleaf made this statement. He said, let the Gospel's testimony be sifted, as it were, given in a court of justice on the side of the adverse party, the witnesses being subject to a rigorous cross-examination. The result is confidently believed will be an undoubtedly conviction of their integrity, ability, and truth. Now, if you think about this man's legal mind and what he applied to it before he made that statement, that's really quite the statement. Now, in a court of law, you'd have people that would be arguing against the disciples as well. For example, the Pharisees had both personal and political motive to expose the disciples as liars if it was at all possible. The same could be said for the Sadducees and the Roman government. And yet, the story of the resurrection originated and grew in the place that's the most likely. I mean, if you think about it, if you're going to make a fabricated lie, the last place you want to do it is the place where people all know all the facts. But this is where the story of the resurrection started at, is where he was crucified and buried. That just seems unlikely. But there's nothing in history that shows that anything comes to the contrary. The disciples, you can look at them and say, okay, what about their motive? What did they have to gain out of this? Well, what did they have to gain out of it? John was exiled to the island of Patmos. All the rest of the disciples died martyrs' deaths. Paul as well, who wasn't one of the original 12 disciples. So you got a whole bunch of people that are willing to die for their beliefs, saying that they've seen, they touched, they talked to, they ate with the risen Lord, and at the end of it, 40 days, some of them actually even watched him bodily rise into heaven. So why would these people be willing to die for something like that? It would have to be a lie if it wasn't true. I mean, if you think about it, if you're going around and you're telling people that you've seen this risen person, you ate with him, you talked with him, you've seen with the imprints from the nails, all these details, if this wasn't true, you know in fact that you're lying. There's no way that you can come up with a story like that, and if it's not true, and not be lying. But this is what these people claimed, and they were willing to die for this belief. Simon Greenleaf also made this other statement that I'd like to share with you. It's on page 32 of his book. It says, "If then their testimony was not true, there was no possible motive for this fabrication." So this man's opinion is these people really believed what they were saying. And you say, well, okay, well, lots of people are willing to die for their belief. Okay, well, this is true. Let's give you an example. The suicide bombers. The suicide bombers are willing to die for their belief. They were willing to die for their cause. Now, the disciples' belief system, their cause, died right there at the cross when Jesus died. They gave up all hope right there. These people weren't willing to die for a belief system. These people were willing to die because they said that they were eyewitnesses of the resurrection. They seen him, they talked to him, they ate with him on numerous occasions for a period of 40 days, in which case some watched him bodily rise into heaven. This is what these people are willing to die for. People aren't willing to die for things like that they know is in fact a lie. So those are the facts of the case. We got these eyewitnesses. We can verify this without even using the Bible. Not all of these eyewitnesses were even believers before the resurrection. Paul and James were not. And we can prove this without even using the Bible. I think I already said that. Anyways, most people don't disbelieve the Bible or the resurrection because of lack of evidence. They disbelieve the resurrection and the Bible because of their preconceived notion that it's just simply not possible. With the resurrection, they say, well, I've never seen anybody rise from the dead. Granted, that's an extremely rare event. But just because it's a rare event doesn't mean it's not possible. Our planet, our universe coming into existence is an extremely rare event. We look around, it's here. I suggest to you that the same thing can be applied to the resurrection. There's people that have sat down and took the historical evidence from the resurrection and tried to disprove it, and ended up being Christians in the process. Why? I suggest to you because it's actually true. Well, anyways, I hope I gave you a little bit of food for thought. If you want more detailed reasons as far as evidence and references and stuff like that, you can find it on my website under Did Jesus Rise from the Dead? My website is at Reasonable Answers. You can end Reasonable Answers in .org, .net, .com. Doesn't matter, all goes to the same spot. Well, I hope it gave you some food for thought, and have a good day.